The divorce papers sat under the Christmas tree like a gift wrapped by the devil. That was the first thing I remember thinking when I looked down at the coffee table, at the neat white stack of documents placed between a bowl of peppermint candy and a porcelain baby Jesus. Outside, snow drifted against the windows of our home in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, soft and clean, the kind of snow that makes every house look forgiven. Inside, under the warm gold lights and the smell of pine, cinnamon, and roasted turkey, my wife Melissa was asking me to sign away 18 years of my life. She stood beside the fireplace in a red sweater dress, one hand folded over the other, smiling like this was just another family tradition. Her parents sat on the couch, Richard with his jaw tight, Diane dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue she had been holding for 20 minutes. And in my leather recliner, the one my mother gave me the year before she died, sat Bradley Cole, Melissa's new future, sipping eggnog from a mug that said world's best husband. I looked at that mug longer than I should have. Not because it hurt the most, but because sometimes pain picks the smallest object in the room and decides to live there. Melissa cleared her throat. "Sign it, Nathan," she said, her voice calm enough to pass for kindness. "Don't ruin Christmas more than you already have." The lights on the tree blinked red, then white, then red again across her face. Behind her, silver ornaments trembled slightly from the heat rising out of the vent. I could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway ticking like it was counting down the last seconds of a man I used to be. Nobody spoke after she said it. They all watched me the way people watch a dog that has finally understood the leash. I was 42 years old, a contractor by trade, the owner of Whitaker Restoration, a man who had spent most of his life fixing roof lines, cracked foundations, flooded basements, sagging porches, and broken things nobody else wanted to touch. But that night, in my own living room, surrounded by stockings with my name still hanging over the mantel, I was the thing they thought needed to be removed. Bradley leaned back in my chair and smiled without showing teeth. "It's better this way, Nate," he said, like we were old friends splitting a dinner check instead of two men standing on opposite sides of a marriage. Clean break. New year, new life. My father-in-law nodded. A real man knows when to let go. That one almost made me laugh. Not because it was funny, but because Richard Parker had never built anything heavier than an opinion. Still, I said nothing. I had learned a long time ago that silence can look like weakness to people who need noise to feel powerful. Melissa stepped closer and slid a black pen across the coffee table. It rolled once, tapped the edge of the document, and stopped with its tip pointing at me. "We discussed this," she said. "You keep your truck, your tools, and whatever is in your business account. I keep the house until it sells. We split the proceeds. No court, no drama, no embarrassing fight in front of everyone." She said everyone like she had brought witnesses to a mercy killing. I looked around the room. Her mother would not meet my eyes. Her father stared at me like I had already disappointed him by breathing. Bradley raised that stupid mug again, and the words "world's best husband" flashed under the Christmas lights. My hands were resting on my knees. They did not shake. That seemed to bother Melissa more than anger would have. She wanted tears. She wanted begging. She wanted me to make a scene so she could point to it later and say, "See, this is why I had to leave him." Instead, I leaned forward, picked up the pen, and felt every eye in that room sharpen. The paper was already open to the signature page. My name had been highlighted in yellow. Nathan Robert Whitaker. A whole life reduced to a blank line. I looked at Melissa and asked quietly, "You're sure you want everyone here for this?" Her smile came back fast. Too fast. "Yes," she said. "I want witnesses." I nodded once. "Good." Then I lowered the pen toward the paper. The pen hovered less than an inch above the line, and for one quiet second, I could almost feel the room leaning toward me. Melissa's breathing changed first. Not much, just a tiny lift in her chest, the kind of almost victory a person tries to hide before the final card is turned over. Bradley set his mug down without taking his eyes off my hand. Richard Parker shifted forward on the couch, elbows on his knees, ready to watch me do what he believed weak men did best. Surrender politely. I kept the pen there, suspended above my own name, while the Christmas tree lights painted little stripes across the divorce papers. Red, white, red, white. Like a warning. Like a hospital monitor for a marriage that had already stopped breathing. "Nathan," Melissa said softly, and that softness was the sharpest thing in the room. "Please do not drag this out. I looked up at her. Not at Bradley. Not at her parents. Her. The woman who once cried when I surprised her with a $79 tree from a roadside lot, because it was all we could afford. The woman who used to sit beside me on the floor of our first apartment, wrapping dollar store ornaments in newspaper because we had no storage bins. The woman who had once told me that Christmas in a small home with honest love was better than any rich man's house. Now she stood in the house my mother had left behind, asking me to sign it away while her new man warmed his hands by my fireplace. Life does not always break loudly. Sometimes it wears perfume, smiles for relatives, and highlights your name in yellow. I am not dragging anything out, I said. My voice came out even. Too even. Diane Parker gave a tiny sob, the kind people make when they want credit for compassion without the burden of understanding. Honey, she said, you both deserve peace. I almost asked her where that peace had been when Melissa stopped coming home for dinner. Where it had been when she began correcting me in front of guests, calling my work dirty, my clothes embarrassing, my hands too rough for the life she wanted. But I did not ask. Questions are for people who still expect honest answers. Bradley finally spoke. This does not have to be ugly. I turned my head just enough to look at him. He was wearing a navy sweater, polished loafers, and the relaxed expression of a man who had mistaken another man's patience for permission. He had probably spent the drive over-rehearsing that line. Maybe in the mirror. Maybe while Melissa told him which roads to take, so the neighbors would see his car in my driveway. You are right, I said. It does not. His smile widened a little, like he had won something. That was the thing about men like Bradley. They did not know the difference between a quiet room and a safe one. Melissa reached toward the papers and tapped the signature line with one manicured finger. Her nails were painted a deep winter red. I noticed because 18 years teaches you to notice everything, even when noticing hurts. Then sign, she said. We can all move forward. Richard nodded again. Your business will survive. You are good with your hands. You will land on your feet. My business. My hands. My feet. He said it like I was a hired man being released from a job site, not a husband being cornered in his own living room on Christmas Eve. I looked at the stockings over the mantel. Nathan. Melissa. 2 names embroidered in gold thread by my mother before the cancer made her fingers too stiff to sew. Melissa had left them hanging tonight. Maybe she thought it made the scene look civilized. Maybe she simply forgot that some ghosts attend family gatherings whether you invite them or not. I set the pen down beside the papers. Not on them. Beside them. The sound was small, but it changed the temperature of the room. Melissa blinked. Bradley stopped smiling. Richard's mouth tightened. What are you doing? Melissa asked. I leaned back slowly and folded my hands together. Thinking. She let out a short laugh with no warmth in it. You have had months to think. No, I said. I have had months to listen. The tree lights blinked again. Diane lowered her tissue. Melissa's face did something quick and careful, like a curtain moving behind a window. Listen to what? She asked. I looked at the front door, then at the clock in the hallway. 9:16 in the evening. 1 minute early. Good. To you? I said. To him. To the way people talk when they believe the man paying the mortgage is too tired to hear them. Bradley stood then, smoothing the front of his sweater like dignity was something you could straighten. With your palms. I think we should keep this respectful. I nodded. I agree. The clock clicked once. 9:17. Then the doorbell rang. The doorbell did not sound loud, but it landed in that room like a judge clearing his throat. Melissa turned toward the front hall, her face tightening before she could stop it. Bradley looked at her, then at me, and for the first time that night, his confidence missed a step. Richard Parker frowned. Who is coming here at this hour? He asked, as if guests needed his permission to approach my front porch. I stood slowly, smoothing the front of my flannel shirt, and felt every eye follow me across the rug. The house was warm, but the air had gone thin. Outside the window beside the door, I could see snow falling through the porch light, each flake bright for half a second before it disappeared into the dark. I opened the door, and Eleanor Grant stood there in a charcoal coat dusted white at the shoulders, a leather briefcase in one hand, and a red folder tucked beneath her arm like it had been wrapped for the holiday. She was in her early 50s, white hair cut neatly at her jaw, eyes calm behind thin gold frames. Eleanor did not look surprised by the room behind me. Good lawyers rarely do. Mr. Whitaker, she said. I apologize for interrupting Christmas Eve. You are right on time, I said. Melissa appeared behind me before Eleanor could step inside. "Nathan, what is this?" Her voice had changed. Still polished, still controlled, but the edges were showing now. Fear does not always shout. Sometimes it speaks more carefully. I opened the door wider. "This is Eleanor Grant, my attorney." The word attorney moved through the room like cold air under a locked door. Diane sat up straight. Richard's frown deepened. Bradley's hands slipped into his pockets, then came out again, as if he could not decide what an innocent man was supposed to do with them. Melissa stared at Eleanor, then at me. "You hired a lawyer?" she asked. 3 weeks ago. I said it gently. That made it worse. Eleanor stepped in, wiped her shoes on the mat, and closed the door behind her without being asked. She took in the tree, the papers, the highlighted signature line, the mug on the side table, the arrangement of people waiting for me to surrender. Nothing on her face moved except her eyes. "I understand there are documents being presented for signature tonight," she said. Richard stood halfway. "This is a private family matter." Eleanor looked at him with the patience of a woman who had heard worse from better-dressed men. "Not anymore." 2 words. Clean cut. Melissa folded her arms. "This is unnecessary. Nathan and I already agreed." I almost admired how quickly she reached for that lie. It was not a dramatic lie. It was a practical one, the kind people use when they believe the room will reward confidence over truth. "No," I said. "You decided. Your lawyer drafted. Bradley encouraged. Your parents witnessed. I was only invited to sign." Melissa's cheeks flushed, but she kept her chin high. "You are making me look cruel." "I am not doing that," I said. "I am letting the facts stand where you placed them." Eleanor walked to the coffee table and set her briefcase beside the divorce papers. The latch clicked open with a small metallic snap. It was not loud. It did not need to be. Every person in that room heard it. She removed a pair of reading glasses, a yellow legal pad, and the red folder. The tree lights reflected off the folder's glossy surface, making it look almost festive, which was the strangest part. Melissa had wanted a Christmas ending. She was about to get one. Bradley took one step toward the table. "Maybe we should all slow down." Eleanor did not look at him. "You are Bradley Cole?" His face tightened. "Yes." "Then I would advise you to remain quiet unless you are asked a direct question." The room froze again, but this time it did not freeze around me. It froze around him. I returned to my place near the couch, but I did not sit. I looked at the pen lying beside the papers, then at the star on top of the tree, silver and slightly bent on one point from the year my mother dropped it while decorating with shaking hands. Melissa followed my gaze, and something in her expression flickered. Maybe she remembered. Maybe she did not. Eleanor opened the red folder and placed the first document on top of Melissa's divorce papers. "Before Mr. Whitaker signs anything," she said, "everyone in this room should understand what these papers are asking him to give away, and what none of you had the legal right to demand in the first place." Melissa whispered my name like a warning. I did not answer. Eleanor turned the document so the room could see the bold heading across the top. "Whitaker Family Trust." Then she looked directly at my wife and said, "Let us begin with the house." Eleanor's words pulled the room backward through time, whether Melissa wanted to go there or not. Let us begin with the house. That house was not marble, not glass, not some magazine mansion with a gate and a fountain. It was a 2-story farmhouse on 6 acres outside Leeds, with white siding, black shutters, a wraparound porch, and an old maple tree that dropped red leaves over the driveway every October. To strangers, it was charming. To me, it was my mother's last act of love. She bought it in 1986 with money from teaching 4th grade and saving every spare dollar my father did not waste after he left. She raised me there on casseroles, library books, Sunday church, and the kind of discipline that does not need to raise its voice. Every Christmas, she put that same silver star on the tree and told me, "A home is not what you own, Nathan. It is what you protect." I did not understand it then. I understood it now. Eleanor tapped the first document with one finger. This property was transferred into the Whitaker Family Trust in 2011, for years before the current mortgage refinance and 7 years before the renovation loan Mr. Whitaker personally guaranteed through his company. Melissa's mouth opened, then closed. She looked at the document like it had changed languages in front of her. "That is not true," she said. But her voice had lost weight. Eleanor slid a second page across the table. "It is recorded with Lancaster County. The house was never a marital asset in the way your proposed agreement describes. Richard Parker reached for the page, but Eleanor placed her hand lightly over the corner before he could take it. You may look. You may not remove anything. I watched his face darken with embarrassment, not anger. There is a difference. Anger points outward. Embarrassment looks for somewhere to hide. Bradley gave a short laugh. This sounds like a technicality. Eleanor finally looked at him. Ownership often does. The room went silent again. I could hear the heater kick on under the window, pushing warm air across the carpet where Melissa and I had once sat wrapping gifts for nieces, nephews, neighbors, clients, people we cared about before our life became a balance sheet. I remembered the first winter after my mother passed. Melissa had stood in the kitchen wearing one of my sweatshirts, holding a mug of coffee with both hands, telling me we would make the house feel alive again. I believed her. I wanted to believe her. So I poured myself into the place. I replaced the porch boards one weekend at a time. I repaired the old stone foundation after a February thaw flooded the basement. I rewired the upstairs bedrooms. I insulated the attic. I planted the blue spruce near the fence because Melissa said every real Christmas house needed evergreens. Back then, she called my hands magic. Years later, she called them rough. Same hands, different audience. Eleanor opened another page. In 2014, Mrs. Whitaker signed a spousal acknowledgement stating that the home was held separately by the trust and that any improvements made by Mr. Whitaker through Whitaker Restoration would not convert ownership. Diane whispered, Melissa? Melissa did not look at her mother. Her eyes were fixed on me now, sharp and bright. You kept that. I almost smiled, but there was nothing funny about it. You signed it at Fulton Bank, I said. You were wearing the green coat. It was raining. We got lunch afterward at the diner on Main Street. You ordered chicken pot pie and told me paperwork made your head hurt. Her face changed. Memory is a cruel witness. It does not care which side needs help. Bradley shifted near the fireplace. His polished confidence had started to peel at the corners. Maybe she did not understand what she signed. Eleanor nodded once. That argument would be stronger if she had not initialed every page beside. A notary and her own attorney. Melissa turned on him then, just for a second, and the look between them told me plenty. Not love, not partnership, calculation under pressure. The kind of glance people share when a plan starts leaking. I looked down at the divorce papers again. Her version had given her temporary possession of the house, authority to list it for sale, and half the proceeds after closing costs. Clean language, dirty intention. It was all there, dressed up as fairness. The Christmas lights blinked across the signature line where my name waited like a trap. Eleanor placed one more sheet on the stack. So no, Mrs. Whitaker, Mr. Whitaker will not be signing away the house tonight. Because it was never yours to take. Melissa did not move after Eleanor said the house was never hers to take. For a few seconds, she only stared at the papers, her lips slightly parted, her face lit by the blinking tree lights that kept changing color as if nothing important had happened. Red, white, red, white. Bradley looked at her like he was waiting for instructions, but she had none to give. That was the first real crack in the evening. Not the trust, not the old signature, not even the fact that her perfect little agreement had just lost its biggest prize. It was the silence between them. People reveal a lot when the script disappears. Richard cleared his throat and tried to recover the room. Fine, he said. Maybe the house is complicated, but the business is not. You built it during the marriage. Eleanor turned one page in her folder. Whitaker Restoration was incorporated in 2009, 2 years before the marriage. Richard's face tightened. It grew during the marriage. It did, Eleanor said. Because Mr. Whitaker worked 70-hour weeks, carried personal liability, reinvested his earnings, and used separate inherited funds for the initial equipment purchase. Mrs. Whitaker was not an officer, not an investor, not a guarantor, and not listed on the operating agreement. Melissa finally found her voice. I supported him. I looked at her then, and the room softened around the edges for half a second, because once upon a time, that had been true. There were years when she brought dinner to job sites in brown paper bags. Years when she sat in the passenger seat of my old Chevrolet Silverado with a clipboard on her lap, helping me track invoices because I could barely afford software. Years when we celebrated landing a roofing contract with 2 slices of gas station pizza and a shared bottle of root beer. I would never erase that woman. The problem was, she had erased herself first. You did, I said quietly. In the beginning. Her eyes sharpened. Do not make me sound like some stranger. I swallowed the old ache before it could climb into my voice. I am not. I am remembering both versions of you. That landed harder than I expected. Diane looked down at her tissue. Bradley stared into the fireplace. Eleanor waited, letting the truth breathe. Good lawyers know when silence is worth more than another sentence. The business had never been glamorous. It began with 1 truck, 2 ladders, a borrowed trailer, and $800 in my checking account after my mother's funeral. I fixed storm damage, replaced gutters, patched roofs, restored barns, pumped water out of basements after heavy rain, and drove home with my shoulders burning so badly I had to sit in the driveway before I could turn the key off. I missed dinners. I missed birthday brunches. I missed soft parts of life because I was trying to build hard shelter around us. Melissa used to say she understood. Then understanding became resentment. Resentment became embarrassment. Embarrassment became strategy. Eleanor placed a printed email on the coffee table. This is where the business becomes relevant tonight. Melissa's eyes dropped to the page, and the color left her face one shade at a time. I did not need to read it. I knew every word. I had read it at 2:14 in the morning 3 weeks earlier, standing barefoot in the kitchen while the refrigerator hummed, and the whole house slept like it had no secrets. It was from Bradley to Melissa. Make him sign on Christmas. He will be too embarrassed to fight in front of your family. Once the house is listed, we push for a valuation on the company and settle before he gets proper counsel. That sentence had done something clean inside me. It ended the pleading. It ended the wondering. It ended the small, humiliating hope that maybe this was grief or midlife panic or 2 lonely people making bad choices in a season that would pass. No, it was a plan. A business plan with my life as the asset. Bradley stepped forward. That was taken out of context. Eleanor looked at him over her glasses. Then you will enjoy providing the context under oath. He stepped back. Small movement. Big confession. Melissa whispered, Nathan, you went through my email? I looked at her, the woman who had placed divorce papers under my mother's Christmas star and invited witnesses to my surrender. No, I said. You left it open on the family computer. Her mouth tightened. She wanted to call me cruel. She wanted to call me sneaky. She wanted to call me anything that moved the spotlight off the page. But the page stayed there. Clean. Flat. Unemotional. Eleanor added another document beside it. There is more. A proposed listing agreement for the property. A draft request for emergency temporary possession. Notes regarding company valuation. All prepared before Mr. Whitaker was ever shown tonight's agreement. Richard sat back slowly, like the couch had become the only solid thing under him. Diane whispered, Melissa, is that true? Melissa did not answer. She did not have to. Outside, the wind pushed snow against the glass. Inside, the tree kept glowing, the turkey cooled in the dining room, and the woman who wanted witnesses finally had them. Melissa's silence did not protect her. It only made the room listen harder. There is a strange sound that comes after a lie loses its roof. Not noise, not panic, a kind of pressure. It filled the living room until even the fire seemed quieter. Bradley kept his eyes on the documents, but his jaw worked like he was chewing on words he no longer had the courage to say. Richard Parker stared at his daughter with the stiff confusion of a man who had spent years believing volume was the same thing as judgment. Diane looked smaller on the couch, her tissue crushed in both hands. And Melissa stood in the center of it all, beautiful, furious, exposed. This is humiliating, she said. I almost looked away. Old habits are hard to kill. For 18 years, if Melissa hurt, I moved toward her. If she cried, I softened. If she felt cornered, I found a way to blame myself for the walls. Marriage teaches you certain reflexes, and heartbreak does not erase them all at once. But then I looked at the papers beneath Eleanor's hand. The proposed listing agreement. The company valuation notes. Bradley's email. The trap with my name highlighted in yellow. My reflex died there. Quietly. Finally. Yes, I said. It is. Melissa blinked like she had expected comfort and received a closed door instead. You brought a lawyer into our home on Christmas Eve. Eleanor did not raise her voice. Mrs. Whitaker, you brought legal documents into his home on Christmas Eve. That correction hung in the air. His home. Not because I needed to own the walls to feel like a man, but because truth had a shape, and for once, someone else was willing to point at it. Melissa turned on Eleanor. You do not know our marriage. No, Eleanor said. I know the documents. They are usually more honest. Bradley took a breath. Look, everybody is emotional. I laughed once, not loud, not happy. It came out like a match struck in a dark room. Everybody. That was the word people use when they want to spread guilt around like butter on toast. Everybody made mistakes. Everybody got emotional. Everybody needed to move on. But everybody had not planned to corner a tired man in front of a Christmas tree. Everybody had not sat in my recliner drinking from a joke mug while my wife asked me to surrender my mother's house. Bradley, I said, and his eyes snapped to mine. You should stop helping. His face reddened. Eleanor slid another sheet from the folder. There is also the matter of the attempted pressure to sign without independent review. Melissa crossed her arms again, but now it looked less like confidence and more like something to hold herself together. He could have said no. He did, Eleanor said, several times by text. Here, and here. She placed the printouts down one by one. Each page made a soft sound against the table. I remembered. Sending those messages. We should both have attorneys look at this. I need time. I will not discuss property with Bradley involved. Melissa had answered with paragraphs about maturity, closure, dignity, not making things harder than they needed to be. Pretty words. Painted doors. Nothing behind them. Diane whispered. I did not know. Nobody answered her. Maybe that was mercy. Maybe that was consequence. The clock in the hallway ticked toward 9:28. Snow tapped the window in soft little grains. Somewhere in the dining room, a candle guttered and sent the smell of vanilla into the air. It mixed with pine and cooling turkey, with paper and ink, with all the things that make a home feel safe until the people inside it prove otherwise. Eleanor reached into the folder again, but this time she did not place the document down immediately. She looked at me first, asking without asking. I gave her one small nod. This was the part one had dreaded, not because it was legally complicated, but because it was the last nail in the version of Melissa I had tried to save. Eleanor set the final page on top of the stack. 3 weeks ago, Mr. Whitaker received a copy of a message chain between Mrs. Whitaker and Mr. Cole discussing the timing of this signing, the intended sale of the property, and the possibility of using public embarrassment to obtain compliance. Melissa's voice dropped. Nathan. There it was. Not anger now. Not command. My name, soft and wounded, like she was the one bleeding. I looked at her and saw every Christmas we had survived, every cheap ornament, every midnight repair, every apology I accepted because I wanted peace more than pride. Then I saw the message again in my mind. Make him sign on Christmas. He will be too embarrassed to fight. My chest went cold, but my voice stayed steady. You did not want peace, Melissa, I said. You wanted an audience. Eleanor opened the page fully. And now you have one. Eleanor did not read the message chain out loud at first. She let the page sit there under the Christmas lights, quiet and patient, because some evidence does not need performance. Melissa stared at it like she could make the ink. Ashamed of itself, Bradley looked toward the front door, then the window, then the floor, measuring exits that would not change what he had written. Richard Parker finally sat down all the way, his shoulders lower than they had been 10 minutes earlier. Diane was crying now, but softly, and for once I believed the tears. Not because she suddenly understood me, but because she had started to understand her daughter. That is a colder grief. Eleanor adjusted her glasses. For clarity, she said, Mr. Whitaker will not be signing the proposed agreement tonight. He will not be vacating the residence. He will not be consenting to a private sale. He will not be discussing business valuation in this room, with these people, under these circumstances. Each sentence landed like a board nailed over a door Melissa thought she had already opened. This is insane, Melissa whispered. No, Eleanor said. This is documentation. Bradley stepped forward again, and I almost felt sorry for him, because men like Bradley cannot resist trying one more time to sound important. You are making this adversarial. Eleanor turned to him with the same calm expression she had worn since she walked in. Mr. Cole, you involved yourself in a legal matter by advising Mrs. Whitaker on timing, pressure, asset division, and strategy. If you continue speaking, you may create additional discoverable statements. He closed his mouth. Fast. The silence afterward was so complete I could hear ice sliding from the roof outside and hitting the snowbank below the kitchen window. Melissa looked at me then, not at my lawyer, not at the documents. Me. For the first time that night, She looked less like a woman managing a scene and more like someone standing in the wreckage of her own certainty. "Nathan," she said, "I did not want it to happen like this." That sentence almost worked. I hate admitting that. There was a part of me, old and tired and trained by years of compromise, that still wanted to rescue the conversation. Smooth it out. Lower the heat. Make the room easier for everyone else to survive. But then I remembered the first time she laughed at my work boots in front of her friends. The first time she called my company cute, like it was a hobby with invoices. The first time she said Bradley understood ambition in a way I never had. I had forgiven those cuts because none of them looked fatal by themselves. That is how slow damage works. It arrives dressed as jokes, suggestions, improvements. Then one day you look down and realize half of you has been carved away. "You are right," I said. "You wanted it to happen with me signing quietly." Her eyes filled, but no tears fell. Melissa was too disciplined for that. She had spent years learning how to make emotion useful. "We can still talk privately," she said. "We should have done that before you invited your family," I said. "Before you invited him. Before you put the papers under the tree." She looked toward Bradley, and he looked away. That tiny betrayal passed between them so quickly the others might have missed it. I did not. A man who restores old houses learns to spot hairline cracks. Eleanor placed a new folder on the table. This one plain manila, no holiday red, no shine. "Mr. Whitaker has authorized me to serve notice of representation and to inform you that all communication regarding divorce, property, and financial matters will go through counsel from this point forward." Melissa's mouth tightened. "Serve notice?" "On Christmas Eve." Eleanor's voice remained level. "You chose the date." I looked at the silver star at the top of the tree. My mother's star. Bent, scratched, still holding light. For weeks, I had wondered whether bringing Eleanor here made me cruel. I had asked myself that in the truck, in the office, in the shower, in the dark hours when a man starts confusing mercy with surrender. But standing there now, I understood the difference. Mercy is not letting someone destroy you gently because the calendar says it is a holy night. Mercy is telling the truth before the lie eats the rest of your life. I picked up Melissa's pen again. Everyone watched my hand. Then I drew one slow line through the highlighted signature space. Not hard, not angry, just enough to make the blank useless. I set the pen down and said, "That is my answer." For 1 second after I crossed out my name. Nobody moved. The line was small, only a streak of black ink through yellow highlight, but it changed everything. Melissa looked at it the way a banker looks at a rejected check. Bradley looked at it like a door had closed between him and the life he had already started spending in his head. Richard's face had gone pale with a kind of quiet outrage he could not spend anywhere. Diane kept crying into her tissue, but now there was no performance left in it. Eleanor gathered Melissa's papers into a neat stack and slid them back across the table. "These will not be used," she said. "They contain inaccurate property assumptions, unsupported business claims, and coercive circumstances that would be very difficult to explain in court." Melissa's head snapped up. "Coercive? I did not force him." Eleanor looked around the living room. At the parents on the couch. At Bradley by the fireplace. At the Christmas tree. At the pen. At the documents placed where gifts should have been. "You created pressure and called it agreement," she said. "Courts can tell the difference." I had never loved a sentence more. Not because it was cruel, because it was clean. For years, Melissa had been good at turning fog into shelter. She could make a complaint sound like concern, a demand sound like compromise, a betrayal sound like personal growth. But Eleanor did not argue with fog. She opened windows. Melissa reached for the papers, then stopped, as if touching them might make the room remember what they were. "I want my attorney called," she said. "That is appropriate," Eleanor said. "From this moment forward, your attorney may contact me directly." Bradley cleared his throat. "And what exactly is supposed to happen now?" Eleanor finally gave him her full attention. "Now, Mr. Cole, you leave a home that is not yours, stop advising on assets that are not yours, and preserve all communications with Mrs. Whitaker regarding this divorce. Text messages, email, voicemail, direct messages, calendar invitations, draft agreements, everything." His face changed at the word preserve. People who have nothing to hide do not usually flinch at storage. Melissa noticed. So did I. The fire popped. Softly, and Bradley looked toward it like the sound had given him somewhere else to put his eyes. Richard stood, but slower this time. "This has gone far enough." Eleanor closed the red folder. I agree. He seemed relieved until she continued. That is why it will continue in the proper venue, with counsel present and records maintained. The old man sat back down. Authority leaves a body in stages. First the voice, then the posture, then the eyes. Melissa turned to me again, and there was something new in her expression. Not regret. Not yet. Regret takes humility, and she had not found that road. This was calculation looking for a softer costume. Nathan, she said, please. We do not have to become enemies. I looked at the stockings over the mantel, our names still stitched in gold, hanging above a row of unlit pine garland. My mother had made those stockings when she still believed Melissa and I would grow old in this house. I had believed it too. Belief is heavy when it dies. It does not vanish. It leaves furniture behind. I never wanted an enemy, I said. I wanted a wife. The room went still again, but this time Melissa looked away first. That told me more than an apology would have. Eleanor opened the plain manila folder and placed a new set of documents on the table. No ribbon, no holiday color, just law, printed in black and white. Mr. Whitaker has also prepared a petition for divorce, she said. Melissa inhaled sharply. Bradley stared at her. Richard muttered something under his breath. Diane whispered, "Oh, Melissa." Eleanor continued, as if the room had not cracked. The filing requests protection of separate property, preservation of business records, and a temporary order preventing disposal, listing, transfer, or encumbrance of trust assets. Melissa's voice was barely above a whisper. You filed first. I looked at the documents, then back at her. No. I waited. My throat tightened, but my voice stayed level. I gave you every chance to be honest before tonight. Her eyes glistened. Mine did not. That surprised me. I thought this moment would burn. Instead, it felt cold and clear, like stepping outside after a storm and seeing exactly which branches had broken. Eleanor slid the petition toward Melissa, but not close enough for her to mistake it for a choice. Merry Christmas, Mrs. Whitaker, she said quietly. This is the agreement your husband is willing to discuss. Melissa stared at the petition like it had arrived from a world where her voice no longer controlled the weather. For 18 years, I had watched that voice bend rooms. It could soften when a neighbor needed help, sharpen when a waiter forgot her order, warm when she wanted me to forgive something she had not fully admitted yet. Tonight, it had nowhere left to go. Eleanor closed her briefcase with a quiet click and stood beside me, not in front of me. That mattered. She had not saved me. She had only carried the proof into a room where I was finally ready to stop saving everyone else. Bradley reached for his coat on the back of my chair. My chair. He lifted it too fast, then fumbled with one sleeve, and for a second the polished man from the beginning of the night looked ordinary. Smaller. Not ruined, not destroyed, just revealed. Melissa, he said, we should talk later. Later. That single word told the room everything. When he believed the house, the sale, the business valuation, and the clean escape were real, he sat by my fire like he had already moved in. When the papers changed, his loyalty suddenly needed a calendar. Melissa looked at him, and I watched the truth reach her face one slow inch at a time. Bradley did not wait for permission. He nodded at no one, walked past the tree, past the stockings, past the table where his plan lay printed in black and white, and let himself out into the snow. The door closed softly behind him. Somehow, that sounded worse than a slam. Diane covered her mouth. Richard stared at the floor. Melissa stood alone in the middle of the living room, and for the first time all night, she looked like a guest in the house she had tried to sell. Nathan, she said. My name came out small. I had wanted that once. Not her defeat, but her softness. I had wanted one honest sentence before lawyers, before documents, before our life became evidence. I had wanted her to say she was scared, or lost, or sorry without attaching a demand to the end of it. But timing is a kind of truth too. Some words arrive after the bridge is gone and call themselves rescue. I reached up and took my stocking from the mantel. The hook made a tiny scrape against the wood. Melissa watched me fold it once, carefully, the way my mother used to fold table linens on Sunday afternoons. I set it on the arm of the couch beside Eleanor's folder. Then I removed my wedding ring. Not dramatically, not with anger. The ring slid over my knuckle with a resistance that felt almost personal, as if even the metal remembered when it meant something. I placed it beneath the tree, beside the unopened gift Melissa had wrapped for appearances. Silver paper. White bow. Empty gesture. You wanted me to sign away my life under my mother's Christmas star, I said. My voice did not shake. Instead, you gave me witnesses. Melissa's eyes filled again, but I did not step toward her. That was the hardest part. Not the papers. Not Bradley. Not the house. The hardest part was teaching my body that her pain was no longer my emergency. Eleanor touched my elbow lightly. We should go over next steps tomorrow, she said. I nodded. Tomorrow. Diane stood and whispered, Nathan, I am sorry. I believed she meant it. I also knew sorry could not uninvite her from what she had agreed to watch. Drive safe, I said. Richard helped her with her coat without looking at me. Melissa remained by the tree, one hand pressed to her stomach, staring at the petition like it might start speaking in a kinder language. It would not. Law is not kind. It is simply less sentimental than betrayal. I walked to the front door and opened it. Cold air rolled into the house, clean and sharp, carrying the smell of snow, wood smoke, and distant chimney fires across the dark yard. The porch light turned the falling flakes gold for one brief second before they vanished. Eleanor stepped out first. I paused on the threshold and looked back once. The tree still glowed. The turkey still sat untouched. The stockings still hung, except mine. The room was beautiful in the way a photograph can be beautiful after everyone in it has changed. Melissa whispered, what happens now? I looked at the woman I had loved, the woman I had lost, and the woman who had tried to make my silence her strategy. Now, I said, we do this honestly. Then I stepped outside, closed the door behind me, and stood under the Pennsylvania snow with my hands empty for the first time in years. Empty did not feel like losing. It felt like room.